Hi everybody, Andrew Cuneo here. Today I'm going to be going over another new standard deck. So this is a deck based around Phyrexian creatures. There's one new card, Grafted Butcher, that I played with a fair amount now, and I think it's a really big payoff for playing with Phyrexians. So it's a Lord, and it has this ability that your creatures get menace the turn you play them, which it does, that certainly matters. But I think the biggest part of this card is the black and 3 sack an artifact or creature, and you can return it to the battlefield. So it's a Lord that keeps coming back, which I've found to be quite powerful. And especially because the turn it comes back, you also get the menace ability, which means it's very hard for people to set up scenarios where they can actually reasonably block you. So I've been very impressed by that card so far. Another new card that is very good in this deck is Progenitor Exarch. So this card I was less sure about before I started playing with it, but I've actually been pretty impressed with it. It's not very good as a 1-drop. You can play it for 1 mana, especially if looking at your hand, you think you're going to have plenty of stuff to do, on turns 4, 5, and 6 of the game. Just playing a 1-drop is fine, but it gets much better if you can wait till you have 3 or 5 mana. So one thing that's come up a lot is, I'll play this on 5 mana, and then the next turn, I'll tap it to animate one of the incubators, play a 6th land, spend 2 mana to animate the other incubator, then spend 4 mana and sack the Progenitor Exarch to bring back the Grafted Butcher, and you're attacking with 8 power across 2 menace creatures that way. So that you can build a gigantic army off of this quite quickly. I've been pretty impressed by that. Some other 1-drops I've got Skrelv, which I predicted when Skrelv came out that it would be really a huge bust, and it's played out better than that, but I still don't think it's a great card. One of the reasons that it wasn't as big of a bust as I thought it would be is that it turns out in Standard, sweepers are pretty close to unplayable. So one of the big weaknesses of this card that it's bad against sweepers. It hasn't really borne out because people just don't tend to play sweepers very much. I've got 2 copies in my deck. It is a Phyrexian. I have 4 Crawling Choruses, which I think a lot of people are going to look at this and say that you should play more Skrelvs and play fewer Crawling Choruses. The reason I have all these Crawling Choruses in my deck is I want bodies to sack because I'm playing 4 Rites of Oblivion and also the Grafted Butchers you can sack things to. I think that having the thing that you're very comfortable sacking because it's going to replace itself with a 1/1. So you can effectively, you get half of your card back if you sack it in some sense. I think that's a pretty big deal. Rite of Oblivion is a very good removal spell that it can only go in very special decks, and I think this is one of them. You can also obviously, you can sack incubator tokens if you don't have the time to put mana into animating them. You can sack the Progenitor Exarch. Also, I have 4 Skrelv's Hives in my deck, because this does make Phyrexians that get pumped up by the Grafted Butcher. And this is another source of things that it's very easy to feed the sack. 3 copies of this Elas il-Kor card. So this is, obviously it's a Phyrexian. I think all of my creatures right now are Phyrexians. And the gain and drain triggers definitely matter a lot. It offsets the life loss from Skrelv's Hive, which is pretty nice. In the 3-drop slot, I've got 3 copies of Gix, which it's certainly a card that once you get ahead with Gix, you win very easily. If you have to play it defensively, it's a little bit not quite as good. And we're going to get to one of the problems with this deck, which is the mana. I'm trying to cast white 1-drops and a double black 3-drop, which is a bit problematic. Another new card. I haven't tried this one very much. It doesn't look that strong to me. It's possible that it's good, though. We're going to have to see by playing some games. So this is a sack outlet. The way I've constructed my deck, the only benefit that I'm getting from sacking things is from Elas il-Kor. If you wanted to, you could play Vran, which would be a different 2-drop. If you wanted to go more into the, profiting from sacking your stuff route. I tried Vran a little bit. I wasn't super impressed. I thought Skrelv's Hive was a lot better. Some of it depends. If you think Standard's going to be a lot of black decks, I think you want to play Skrelv's Hive. If you think Standard's going to be a lot of aggressive red decks, you might want to play Vran over Skrelv's Hive. I mean, you might want to, have some of one in the sideboard and be able to sideboard based on what your opponent's playing. I started out with Vrans in my main deck and Skrelv's Hives in my sideboard, and I very quickly decided I just wanted Skrelv's Hives in my main deck, and I didn't even like Vran enough that I was going to leave it in my sideboard, but I haven't really had to play against mono red very much, so it's possible you would want it there. 2 wedding announcements. This is the only card in my deck that does not make Phyrexians, so it's the only card that doesn't benefit from Grafted Butcher. But it's producing fodder for, you can sack to bring back the Grafted Butcher or to cast a Rite of Oblivion. Also, it eventually turns into an Anthem, which, certainly helps out all the tokens you got from Skrelv's Hive or, Crawling Chorus tokens that are sitting around. Definitely a strong card. It's possible you want more. It's possible you want a different mix of Skrelv's Hives and Wedding Announcements. I've been happy with this so far, but I could see trying to figure out a way to fit 4 Wedding Announcements because it's obviously a good card. 2 Sheoldred, the Apocalypse is in my deck. This is a Phyrexian. If you do a search for Phyrexians at 4 mana, there's actually a ton of somewhat reasonable options. There's Phyrexian Obliterator, Phyrexian, I think it's called Justiciar. Where is it? Here we go. Phyrexian Vindicator. I always think it's Justiciar, but it's Vindicator. There's Mondrak, which is, you are making a lot of tokens. I played for a while with this Elas Norn in my deck. This card really didn't ever do anything. I didn't try Mondrak. I think Mondrak would have been better than this, but there's this problem with all of the 4-drops that Sheoldred's just so good. It's so hard for one of them to be better. Like, maybe if your mana was just such that you could just always cast it on 4 mana, maybe you'd be interested in this. Probably not, even though. There's the Obliterator, which is somewhere over here. Oh. Does it have the other art on Arena? Yeah, I would have recognized it if I'd seen that art. So this is like, anybody who's tried even playing mono black quickly realizes that in almost all matchups, Phyrexian Obliterator is worse than Sheoldred. I thought about playing with Archfiend of the Dross for a little bit. It is, if you're playing a bunch of sack outlets, you're way less likely to wind up losing the game to this card. So you can run the drawback, but again, it's just not as good as Sheoldred. Sheoldred's a pretty lame card. It's just so much better than all the other 4-drops. So it really leads to boring deck building, but it is what it is. I've got 1 copy of this new card, Pylon. I think this card's probably not very good. This has been my limited experience from playing with it. 4 mana, even if you're getting to discount with Convoke, is a lot for what this card is doing. Like, I think if this card costs 3 mana, it would be a good card, but at 4 mana, I think it's not actually very impressive. I'm going to keep trying it. And it is also nice to just have, having this as a one-of gives you the ability to kind of surprise your opponent sometimes but you don't have to ever have the clunky hand where you just draw a bunch of them. So that's kind of nice. This is the new Sheoldred, which I've been playing with just to try it out. I got to say that it's not awful, but I think it's not as good as other options at 4 or 5 mana. I'm going to keep giving it some more tries, but I've run into the situation where the 5 mana flip ability requiring your opponent to have 8 or more cards in their graveyard, you don't really get to that point all that quickly with this deck, especially because Rite of Oblivion exiles. You're playing mostly removal that exiles, so you don't fill your opponent's graveyard all that easily. So it takes way too long to turn on, so you're mostly just getting the front of the card. And the front of the card it's not awful, but it's nothing special. I'm going to keep trying it a little bit more, but I suspect that you'd eventually want to replace it from the deck. All right, now we get to the lands, and when I was talking about Gix, I said that is part of the problem. There's no fast land in Standard. There's no Concealed Courtyard. So the Caves of Koilos, slam dunk 4 of. Shattered Sanctum is like, you'd prefer not to be playing it because you do really want to play 1-drops in this deck, but I just couldn't. It didn't seem like you could make the mana work without it. I know people are going to want to suggest that I play with Secluded Courtyard, I think is the name of it. And I did put that in my Dragons deck the other day, but that deck was a little bit different because I was only trying to cast non-creature spells of 1 color, so it was easier to, you know, build the rest of my mana base to be able to cast those. Here, I'm essentially, I want this to be one of my black sources because I'm trying to, I have a hard to cast double black Phyrexian, but if I start, you know, switching Shattered Sanctums for Secluded Courtyards, I'm very quickly going to get to the point where I'm going to have a hard time casting Rite of Oblivion. And I'm certainly going to have a hard time if I want to, 6 mana, you know, cast Rite of Oblivion twice in 1 turn. It's going to be really hard. Secluded Courtyard is just one of those cards that, unless your whole deck is that creature type, it's really hard to justify playing in my mind. So instead I have 2 copies of Mirrex. Mirrex is nice because the activated ability on it certainly matters. We're a deck that's interested in, you know, Phyrexian tokens, so making tokens it's pretty great. And it does give you like a 1-turn window where your spells are easy to cast. So if you have enough lands and you can sequence it, so you play the Mirrex the turn you know you're going to need double black, or, you know, if your mana is just going to work out, you can play it on turn 1 and just play a 1-drop off of it. That's really nice. I started with 3 of them, but I found that I was getting too many hands where I drew multiple Mirrexes, and like once you had the 1 turn of good mana, you'd have all these turns where your mana was just awful. So I didn't really want to play more than 2 copies of this. Other than that, I've got a bunch of basics. You could maybe cut some Shattered Sanctums and just play more basics and just hope it works out. That's usually not how I like to build my mana bases, but I think that there are people who would definitely do that with this deck. They'd, you know, just cut 2 Shattered Sanctums for another Plains and another Swamp and just hope. Might not be the worst idea. Looking at the sideboard, we've got a couple more just really good Phyrexians. Annex Sentry, I think, is a very strong Phyrexian. Also Phyrexian Missionary, it's a very strong Phyrexian in a white-black deck, obviously. There's also, you could, if you wanted to, you could play, what's the name of it? It's Artifact Creature. It's Artifact 7-drop. There it goes. The Phyrexian Flesh Gorger. Like, depending on what, you certainly want to have some sort of sideboard plan to take Skrelv's Hive out of your deck against an aggressive mono red deck. Right now, I'm going with the plan of Phyrexian Missionary, you know, 2/3 lifelink, gives you some more value later on in the game, but also just against that mono red deck, usually getting to 2/3 is kind of the sweet spot because they have a lot of 2/2s in their deck. So having something that's big enough to beat those in combat is a pretty nice thing. Another new card, Invasion of Gobakhan. I played with this a fair amount, and I have to say I'm not sure it's actually better than Duress or even Pilfer. You know, just 2 mana make them discard a card. I played a lot of games with it where I wish it was Duress or Pilfer, but I have occasionally had the game where you get to flip it, and if you get ahead and you flipped this, you basically win. It's really hard for people to come back usually once you've got this in play and you've started getting counters on creatures. So I want to keep trying it. I think that maybe in a white-black deck it is worse than the black discard options. I think if you're like a mono-white or a white-green deck, so you don't have access to Duress or Pilfer, it probably has a place in sideboards there. Maybe even, you know, in small numbers in the main deck. I do think this is a card you probably don't want to put 4 of in your deck because a huge part of this card is being able to flip it and being able to flip it, you know, early and easily. And if you draw a hand with like 2 or 3 copies of them, it's going to be hard to do that. So far, my reaction to this card has been kind of mixed. It's possible I maybe even come to the conclusion that I just don't think it's a good card and you shouldn't play it at all. But for right now, it's shown enough potential. I want to keep trying it. Some cut downs, go for the throat, a whack somewhere. Whack is primarily against, well, whack actually there's a lot of good matchups for it. If you play against like the mono white deck and they have the 4 mana 3/4 angel, Sarah something, obviously whack is good against that. Whack's pretty good against Esper Legends. It hits a lot of their stuff, although it doesn't hit Sheoldred, which is a little bit awkward. I've got to go for the throat to board in another card that can hit Sheoldred. Mostly you're counting on your Rite of Oblivions and the 1/1 to hit Sheoldred. Gix's Command, which is, I like having, you know, just being able to board in like one kind of surprise your opponent sweeper card. And Gix's Command sort of functions like that, which is pretty nice. And then I also wanted to try one Archangel Elspeth. This is mostly for people who are trying to sweep you with like Farewell, or there's a new card that's 5 mana that exiles all creatures and they incubate for the number of creatures exiled, that people have played against me some, or depopulate, you know, stuff like that, where you want to be able to put a permanent into play that advances your board but doesn't just get removed by sweepers. So I've got one Archangel Elspeth to try. Also, I think that the abilities of this card are going to be pretty good in this deck. I haven't gotten a chance to cast it yet. So that's the deck. I have tested it some and iterated on it some, and I think it's got a reasonable amount of potential. Mostly off the back of Grafted Butcher, I think is just great, and Progenitor Exarch are quite good. So let's give it a try. Let's hand on the draw. I think is a mulligan. This is I think a borderline hand, but if Progenitor Exarch was better as a 1 mana play, I would probably keep it, but it's pretty lackluster as a 1-drop, especially if you're not going to follow it up with Grafted Butcher. This, I think, is a stronger hand. Probably can do without Caves of Koilos. I'm going to go turn 1 Shattered Sanctum. It's possible I'm going to wind up playing the Mirrex as my 3rd land, and then I'm going to be sad that I don't have access to double black as the game goes on, but I think there's enough upside from keeping the Mirrex that it's worth doing. All right, I'm glad that my opponent has a somewhat clunky draw. They didn't just play Fable of the Mirror Breaker there, which is nice. They're going beneath the underdog. I'm gonna play for like trying to get to a slightly better long-term position. Trade some life total here. Next turn I can conceivably just Rite of Oblivion all of their permanents. I think I'm only gonna take out the underdog this turn. And then I'm going to cast the rest of my creatures. I've got a card coming from the wedding announcement. I'm going to be pretty sad if it turns out my opponent has like Gix's Command in their hand. I can also Rite of Oblivion away the Skrelv's Hive, although I'm going to be sacking it here to invoke Despair. I want to let that hit me. Yeah, I think I can afford to let that hit me, because I'm about to play Elas il-Kor, and I'll gain some life. Oh, but I don't have double black now. That's awkward. Yeah, I shouldn't have attacked with the Skrelv, I guess. Because I could have actually surveilled with the pile-on. die to a second Invoke Despair, but my life total is going to become precariously low. So that's not ideal. I do die to third Invoke Despair. I don't die to Sheoldred because I can kill it in my upkeep. Or I could actually just go to 1 and then Rite of Oblivion it, but I think I would choose to kill it in my upkeep. That doesn't scare me. That's kind of annoying. So I could Rite of Oblivion, the Graveyard Trespasser, pitching the spare Elas il-Kor, sacking the Crawling Chorus, and then pile on the other Blood Tithe Harvester. Attack for 4. That'll be at 9. Guess that's what I'm going to do. Oh, I don't get to attack for 4. I only get to attack for 2. So I have to tap the Elas il-Kor for black mana. I think I need to try to get this game over with. I'm giving up access to something that could deal with Sheoldred. I don't actually die to Sheoldred, because I'll go to 1 and then I'll Rite of Oblivion it with the token, go back up to 2. I do die to Invoke Despair, number 3, which is why I'm trying to get this game over with as quickly as possible. Despair and Sheoldred are still probably going to win them the game. Graveyard Trespasser, and that's less scary. Still somewhat scary. Yeah, here we go. The dreaded can't play Gix hand. So if I attack with Elas il-Kor, I'll just block with the Mishra's Foundry. Can this get protection from artifacts? Yeah, it's just colored creatures. And it's not even protection, it's hexproof. I think I lose. Because this is going to flip. They won't be able to. They won't attack me next turn, at least not with the Graveyard Trespasser, because they're not going to want to trade it with Elas il-Kor. But the turn after that, they'll be able to Reflection of Kiki Jiki, 2 Graveyard Gluttons, and I don't think I'll be able to live through that. No, maybe I'll be able to live through it. I think I'll be in bad shape though. I can also just send the Graveyard Gluttons in one at a time. Okay. If they're doing this, I've got a little bit more hope, I think. Not really, though, because they're still gaining. They gained 3 life from the Graveyard Glutton. So definitely a problem. So I can play this. I can block one thing, but being able to block one thing is not enough. I wonder if this would have killed my opponent if I'd drawn it 2 or 3 turns earlier, just sacking my whole board. So I obviously like Wedding Announcement and Skrelv's Hive. I guess I'm going to keep Skrelv in my deck, even though I kind of hate it. I think I'm gonna board in Archangel Elspeth. Do I want Gix's Command over Sheoldred? I don't know. Let's keep trying Sheoldred. Maybe I want go for the Throat over Pylon. Yeah, let's try this. I guess I did have to mulligan last game, which is always bad when you have to mulligan. Am I pitching Rite of Oblivion or my backup Gix? I think I'm going to pitch Rite of Oblivion. I don't have anything to sack to it. Well, I guess eventually I could get Mirrex things, but I think my opponent's probably going to really want to kill Gix. So having a backup Gix is nice. Probably this is just going to trade with something. Hopefully not, though. Come on, have nothing. They're getting priority, so they don't have nothing. Come on, no Graveyard Trespasser. That'd be rude. Got plans for this Graveyard Butcher. Alright. We did kill Gix, as predicted. Should I let them hit me for a treasure token? I can animate this, get the Grafted Butcher back. I guess I can also just play Skrelv this turn. Just wait. This way I'll have Skrelv in play when I bring the Grafted Butcher back. We again had this thing happen. The same thing happened last game where it was just hard to cast Gix because of Mirrex. It's just a problem. All right. Many double black cards. Wait, how did they Dreams of Steel and Oil the Grafted Butcher? Oh, they get one from their graveyard, too. Wow. They really got me good. This has not been a strong showing. Maybe I can win if I draw a second black mana. This thing just kills so fast if I let it sit and play. Or even one turn. I'd have to take 6 extra damage to get to the point where I could go after it with a winning announcement. Alright, I lose. Fable and Mirrex is such a good card. That was a match where I had to mulligan both games, and I think my opponent kept 7 both times. It's always going to be a problem. Alright, this is a hand I'm going to keep. On 7 cards. Obviously, I'm going to need to draw a little bit of top end as the game progresses. This might be some sort of control deck, huh? Shouldn't be worried about Make Disappear. A little bit worried about Make Disappear, but I don't know that if I cast my cards in a different order, I can actually bait it out with the Elas il-Kor. I suppose it would have worked out better, probably, had I played Elas il-Kor on turn 2. They appear to not have enough lands. Let's see if they have to Make Disappear. Ooh, I gained a life right away from Sheoldred. I didn't even have to wait to draw a card. Opponent's also a Mirrex gamer. So that was obviously some sort of blue-white control deck. I want my Duress. I want my Archangel Elspeths. I want my Invasion of Gobakhans. I think I do not want Pylon. I certainly want to trim some of the Rite of Oblivions at a minimum. I'm going to continue my hatred of Skrelv. It's possible they have stuff that I really need to be able to remove with Rite of Oblivion, but I'm going to wait to see if that turns out to be the case for Game 3. I think Skrelv is probably a very strong card in this matchup, so I will keep my hand on the strength of having 2 of them. This bad Sheoldred also does give me an additional way to kill an important creature or planeswalker, should it somehow matter. Dissipated. It's cold-blooded opponent. Come on, no Wandering Emperor. Nice. I'm going to kill that Teferi Temporal Pilgrim. It's going to die. Should I attack first to get them to jump with the spirit token? This is non-token. Non-token creature or planeswalker. Does that mean that you have to sack non-token planeswalkers? I'm not sure what the scoping on non-token is. I think I don't even have double black mana, so I can't even play the Sheoldred. I don't know what I'm thinking about. We got to do this. Sad. Yet again, I drew both of my Mirrexes. Like I said, I started with 3 in my deck, and I took one of them out so that this would happen less, but it's still happening quite a lot. It's Mirrex on Mirrex violence.
You live because I allow it.
Oh, I could have played my other Mirrex last turn, couldn't I have? Yeah, I take back what I said about not being able to cast the Sheoldred. That was just... And somehow in my mind, like, the Mirrex in play didn't make black mana, and that made the one in my hand also not make black mana, which doesn't make very much sense. But that's where I was at. Being invaded by an army of knights. Could really go for a Grafted Butcher right about now. What happens if this flips? I get a Teferi Planeswalker. They can get emblems that improve their knights. Like a looting thing. They probably don't have many creatures in their deck. What is this?
Her best plans are improvised.
Minus ability that requires you to have untapped creatures. This doesn't seem like a great planeswalker in a creature-like deck. And I get that they got a bunch of creatures to power it initially. I still can't flip this thing. It's ridiculous. So if I want to attack, they eat 3 of the knights. Or... they triple block the Sheoldred and they don't eat, but not the knights, they eat the Mite tokens. I think I'm going to attack like this. They're going to flashback Memory Deluge this turn probably. And then could easily be facing a sweeper, so I might as well use my creatures this turn. Even though it's not a stellar attack for me. You can double Mirrex now. It's pretty nice. If they find another one of these Invasion of New Phyrexians, it's going to be really bad for me. I think they would have played it before combat had they found one. Because they could have played it and then immediately flipped it again. And a million knights. Oh, this card's good. Although, it's not that good against tokens. They're gonna... oh, it is good against tokens. They get an 8/8. It's good to have an 8/8. think I have to block. If they have the Wandering Emperor, it's over. Yeah, okay. I guess I could maybe top deck Rite of Oblivion, but
Feel the energy of battle, then guide it like water.
certainly
Tell them how we
it was going to be a problem if they have the Wandering Emperor, and it is a problem. It's not a good draw. It's probably pretty good. Should I just try to poison them out and just ignore the Wandering Emperor? Is that my best way to win? I think so. And if that's my strategy, it probably doesn't make any sense to play Progenitor Exarch. Should probably just make more mites.
guards to me.
So they're going to hit me for, if they put 12? Oh, and then the Skrelv Hives would kill me, so I do need to play this. Do I want to make a Mirrex thing? Or do I want to just make more incubator stuff? I can have 3 blockers against my 6 attackers. I think I want to make 1 Mirrex token. This way they need 3 blockers and 1 spell isn't enough for them to live through this next combat. They need 2 spells, I believe, because they are at 7 poison. And I'm going to have 7 attackers. Okay, that doesn't kill me. Okay. Don't care about that. I think they needed to go after 2 of the mites in order to live, like this hand. I think I'm going to hold off on casting the Progenitor Exarch here. It'd probably maybe get to attack for 2 damage and then become mostly irrelevant, I think. Oh. Against mono red, I'm kind of wishing I had cast it. But I didn't know I was playing against mono red. My hand, which I thought was great, is instead awful. Oh, this Phoenix card. First time seeing that one. I'm not... I have seen people trying mono red with some of the new cards. I'm not sure that the new cards actually make the deck better. The new cards being Stoke the Flames, this Phoenix. There's also a Invasion that does 4 damage to people's face for 3 mana. I haven't been super impressed by any of that stuff. Do I want to throw out my Skrelv's Hive? I need to play Rite of Oblivion for sure. Yeah, I guess I have to. I'm going to leave myself the option of convoking Pylon. If they play a Thundering Raiju, Thundering Kaiju, whatever it's called. I also might... If they attack with the Monastery Swift Spear here, I'm going to incubate my thing. I think I can afford to let the squee come out. So squee coming back next turn? No. I'm going to 1. So I'm done casting white spells until I draw something that produces white mana. It isn't this Caves of Koilos. Yeah, I died to basically anything there. The only thing I could beat was them attacking with their 2 creatures and be going block pile 1. So that was quite a turnaround from I thought my hand was great to it turned out to be terrible. I think I want all these cut downs. I definitely want the cut downs. I think I want the Annex Sentries. Probably won't go for the throat. I don't think I want Duress. I don't know if I want this thing. It does make lifelinkers. It's got to be better than this 5-mana Sheoldred at a minimum. Definitely don't want Skrelv's Hives, and I think I don't want Skrelv. And I should probably trim Rite of Oblivions, because I just boarded out a lot of the fodder for them, and I just boarded in a bunch of removal, so I don't think I want 4 of them anymore. I think wedding announcements are fine. I guess it would be nice to be able to maybe trim a Gix. But I don't think I have anything I would prefer over it. I don't think... The Gix's command can be okay occasionally in this matchup, but I think it's mostly pretty bad. Just because it's 5 mana. Like, if you're getting to do the mode where you're making something big and making it lifelink, and you're sweeping the board with destroyed creatures with power 2 or less, that's good, but I just don't think that situation comes up often enough. This hand's no good. This hand's pretty bad, too. Come on, Sheoldred. I think this matchup, I think I'm probably going to lose just because my first hand was awful against mono red, and this time I mulled into a hand that doesn't have any of my good cards in this matchup in it. I do think this is probably an okay matchup for this deck, and I also think you could just make this matchup a lot better if you wanted to, just by playing more copies of 4-mana Sheoldred. Maybe playing Phyrexian Fleshgorger in your sideboard. Something like that. Gonna take a bit of a hit here. Rite of Oblivion's looking pretty sad. Oh no, being overrun by Phoenix Chicks. Yeah, I definitely can't win from this spot. This is trample, right? Yeah. Ow. Alright, I go to 2. Not a strong showing. Alright, this is probably the best draw I've had so far. Should I play Progenitor Exarch turn 1? I'm going to say no. I'll play Elas, il-Kor turn 2. I might play Progenitor Exarch turn 3, because then the turn after that I can incubate and play Grafted Butcher. I think I want to attack first here. This way, if my opponent has a 2-mana removal spell, they might be tempted to save it to kill a 3-drop. Like now, if they have some sort of like a shock or if they have a braid in their hand, they'll probably kill Elas il-Kor, and I got to deal 2 more damage. Than I otherwise would have. Ooh, I have a counter. Okay. Probably gonna have to use Takenuma to bring back the Progenitor Exarch at some point. Drawn a fair amount of lands. I'm going to be very sad if they have Brotherhood's End. Or whatever the new 3-mana one is called. They do not. They have a card called Rending Flame. They let me gain 1 more life than I should have been able to. And I thank them for it. I wonder what their deck's trying to do. It's obviously some sort of blue-red control deck, but what is it working towards? Maybe it's Leer? Leer is a respectable thing to work towards. Might need to be careful in how much I commit to the board this turn. Because I don't want to just get crushed by a second burn down the house. I think I'm going to leave one of these as a incubate. Hit them for 6. You go to 5. If this all connects, and I'll have the option of incubating this at the end of their turn. If I had animated this, I would, and they didn't have anything, I'd be putting them to 1, but then I would have nothing left if they have a second burn down the house. They have Spectral Adversary. If you had asked me to guess what card was in their hand, I would not have guessed Spectral Adversary. It's really not that bad for me, though. Alright, I think against their deck I clearly want Duress. I think I want Invasion of Gobakhan. Probably want these Phyrexian Missionaries. I didn't see anything that makes me want Unlicensed Terse, so I'm not going to bring it in. If they are a Leer deck, I probably do actually want it. Rite of Oblivion seemed really bad. I also definitely want Archangel Elspeth. I think I'll cut Pile on. So now I'm playing literal 0 removal. Which, I don't know that I'm excited about that fact. Oh wait, I also have too many cards in my deck right now. What should I take out? They had Brotherhood's End and Burn Down the House in there. Oh no, the Brotherhood's End was a different match. They did have Burn Down the House. Like, I hate having Skrelv in my deck when I know my opponent has sweepers. I guess I'm gonna have 1 in my deck. I wouldn't mind having a removal spell in my deck, but I would like to know, like, what's the right one to have. And I don't know what the answer to that is based on what I saw in the first game, so I think I'm just going to have none. I'm going to have an interesting decision on turn 2 if they leave their mana untapped. They did not. Oh, they have Bloodthirsty Adversary in their deck. So like a mid-range deck of some variety. Alright, I guess I'll play Elas il-Kor. I have the Skrelv to protect it, and I guess I need to be a little bit careful of my life total if they have stuff like Bloodthirsty Adversary in their deck. Maybe they're a red-blue mid-range beatdown kind of deck. Who knows? I certainly don't. So I want to attack with my Elas il-Kor. My Skrelv. I don't think so. I think I'm going to play this one nice and slow until I get some more Grafted Butchers in play. Whoa, they like their hand? They kept them all? Seems not good for me. I'm gonna continue to relax. I don't have any way to kill Reflection of Kiki-Jiki, which is scary because they can start reflectioning the Bloodthirsty Adversary and recasting cards from their graveyard. Can this hit Planeswalkers? Can. Interesting. I think I'm ready to start attacking. So it can make something a flying angel. Ooh. I got the creature out of my graveyard just in time. So I'm going to attack with Elas il-Kor rather than playing the Progenitor Exarch first. I'm potentially giving up a point of life here, but I'm making it so they might be more hesitant to double block this. They are not. They probably felt like they just had to. That's okay. I don't think I'm going to miss the 1 point of life. Hopefully, they don't just have a bunch of removal spells for Grafted Butcher. So I think I pretty clearly mis-sideboarded because I didn't understand what their deck was. Archangel Elspeth doesn't look very good here. I would much rather have it, cut down would have been a lot better, or go for the throat, something like that. Rite of Oblivion, probably wouldn't have been great in this matchup. Maybe Rite of Oblivion is worse in Standard than I thought. If it's a lot of, like, cheaper red cards, that's not great. Rite of Oblivion, you're really hoping to hit 3 and 4 mana targets when you're casting it. Not, yeah, even Reflection it's a 3 mana target, but it's inherently like 2 permanents. So that's not that great to hit, really. Do I want to play Gix, or do I want to just animate more of these things? I can play Gix, incubate one of them, and then tap this to incubate the other one. They can animate... Yeah, there's no benefit to them, like, animating and Unlacing Sturse and copying it with Reflection of Kiki-Jiki. That doesn't get them anywhere. I think I'm just going to play Gix. And have 2 5/5 incubators. Incubatees. They start out as an incubator, but then they turn into a Phyrexian. But I think that this is actually a Phyrexian incubatee, because it was targeted by the incubator. Alright, so what did we learn from that? I think that the mana was definitely a problem, like I said it was going to be. I think I ran a little bit bad in some of the games in terms of how the mana played out. But it's definitely, it's a weakness of this deck. Like, I've got 15 black sources plus the 2 Mirrexes to cast double black cards. That's on the borderline, I would say. I've got 16 white, which I have a lot of single white cards. So that's certainly fine, but I only have 12 untapped white turn 1 plus the 2 Mirrexes, which again, that's like on the borderline. That's maybe fine. It would be nice if there was maybe a way to build this deck as a base black deck. And my white cards were maybe just Progenitor Exarch and Skrelv's Hive. Rite of Oblivion wasn't as good as I was expecting it to be. It would probably be fine if those were just more go for the throat type cards, or I don't know, pile on. I cast it once or twice. It was certainly nothing special. This Sheoldred, I think it's pretty obviously not a very good card. I would be looking to replace it going forward with, like, a third Sheoldred. The Apocalypse would be the easiest upgrade to make. What are the 1-drops like if... I'm not going to change the deck today, but I'm curious, what kind of black 1-drops can I get that are Phyrexians? Because I know there are some. By some, there's one. It's the Bilious Skull Dweller. There might be some I don't own. Batterfly Swarm, no thank you. The Evolved Sleeper turns into a Phyrexian once you've spent 3 mana. It's not a horrible 1-drop. And it's really not that important that the cards be Phyrexians, because it's really just the Grafted Butcher. that it matters for. I guess it matters for the Bloated Processor as well. I never drew that card, so I don't know if it's a good or bad card. Kind of suspect it's not that good. But the more Bloated Processors you play, the more you really care about your cards being Phyrexians. Oh, wait, is this thing a Phyrexian? The Ichor Drinker. So 1/1 lifelink you can exile to get a 2/2 Incubator. That's like not, it's not crazy to play with that, but it doesn't seem like it's particularly good. It seems worse than Crawling Chorus. You know, if you put colored considerations aside, especially because it also costs a black mana to get it out of the graveyard. So you're having to spend 3 mana to get a 2/2 that can block versus no mana to get a 1/1 that has toxic. And I did get 1 toxic kill in those games. Yeah, those are the only Phyrexians. Yeah, so it would be nice if this deck could be more focused on one color. And how you get there, I'm not sure yet. I don't think I'm going to figure that out today. One last thing I was going to say is there is another Phyrexian card that I considered that I did not wind up leaving in my deck. This thing, the Phyrexian Censor. Each player can't cast more than 1 non-Phyrexian spell each turn, and non-Phyrexian creatures enter the battlefield tapped. So this is a good card, I would imagine, in older formats, where each player can't cast more than 1 non-Phyrexian spell each turn. Does actually stop some decks from functioning. Like if you're a combo deck that's trying to cast a bunch of spells in one turn, like in Pioneer against a Lotus Field deck, this would actually, you know, stop them from winning. But I don't think decks like that really exist in Standard, so I decided not to play with it. The second sentence is pretty powerful in Standard, just having all of your creatures, all your opponent's creatures come into play tapped, assuming you're not playing some sort of mirror. That's a pretty big deal, but I think it's not enough to play over a 3/3 that gives you a 3-drop that gives you immediate value or snowballs more. That's just the nature of Standard, that you really, if you're going to put 3 and 4 mana cards in your deck that just die to go for the throat, they need to either give you a bunch of value even when they die, or they need to just snowball really hard. Which Sheoldred definitely snowballs really hard. Gix, it's a little bit harder to get the snowball going, but once it gets going, it really works. So I think that is why you're not going to see Phyrexian Censor in Standard. And with that, I'm going to say thanks for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe, and I will see you next time.